The galaxy of the 41st millennium is a horrifying place to live. It is a realm characterized by profound eldritch dread and unrelenting terror. For centuries, both eyewitness testimonials and after-action reports describing otherworldly atrocities that defy human comprehension have been cataloged at increasingly alarming rates. For every verified incident, 10 more tales slip between the cracks of history, their events going unrecorded, their horrors uncatalogued, and their victims left forgotten. Many more are simply covered up by the Imperial Inquisition or lost within the labyrinthian system of bureaucracy that is the Adeptus Administratum. There are, however, some stories that refuse to go quietly into the night. Whispers of unspeakable horrors and events so traumatic they left a stain upon reality itself. These legends fester like a cancer in the forgotten corners of the universe, spreading plague-like through myths whispered in the dim glow of underhive bars and battlefield campfires across the galaxy. The wise dismiss them as the tall tales of voidfarers, while the foolish set out to prove their legitimacy, often unaware that such a path leads down the razor's edge between sanity and irreparable madness. One such tale is the subject of tonight's video, The Terminus by David Annandale, a short story included in the Warhammer horror anthology The Accursed, released in the fall of 2021. As always, I implore you to support the original release and have included a link to this anthology down in the description below. Vazia Reinhardt has spent a lifetime chasing myths, while her brother Bakken gambled on salvation. Tonight, they will find themselves standing on a crumbling platform in search of a legend, a local ghost story, a train that rides the rails only on the darkest of nights, one that stops only for those desperate or foolish enough to seek it. The stories say it goes to Volgast, a place no map has ever marked, a name spoken in hushed, uncertain tones. Some say the train leads to riches beyond imagining, while others believe its final destination is something far more sinister. Tonight, my friends, the train has arrived, and its doors are sliding open in invitation. So gather round and listen well as we delve into curiosity turned to horror in the Grimdark Story Hour. But before we get into it, as you can probably tell, I'm a big fan of all things spooky, whether it's skeletons, zombies, werewolves, or Draculas. I love them all. Recently, I've been super addicted to a game that's got champions based around all of them, and you're going to want to stick around to the end as I've got some rewards to give out that you're not going to want to miss. This game's got it all: AAA graphics, clan bosses, PvP arenas, dungeons, an endless amount of content, and can even be played on PC. That's right, I'm talking about Raid Shadow Legends, the sponsor of this video. To celebrate Raid's 6-year anniversary, they're throwing a Grand Masquerade, and they asked me if I could be any champion, who would it be and why? Well, the answer was obviously my boy Vlad the Nightborn, the undisputed king of the Doom Tower. His AoE lifesteal allows him to tank through almost anything, and his defense debuffs make your DPS champions feel broken OP. Well, the developers whipped up some magic behind the scenes, and they turned me into this absolute beast of a vampire. What do you think? Did I manage to pull it off? If you could be any raid champion, who would it be and why? Let me know in the comment section. Over 5 million active users can't be wrong. If you've never played Raid before, now's the perfect opportunity to start. New players who download Raid via my link will get an incredible birthday package featuring the epic hero Zargala, plus other goodies with a total value of $60 for free. Then you can use the promo code Supreme6 to unlock the legendary champion Supreme Gaelic, and all players can unlock the legendary champion Alice the Wanderer simply by logging into Raid for 7 days between now and March 26th. These champions are only available if you use my link or QR code. It won't work if you get the game directly through the App Store. So make sure to use my link to download the game for free today and collect these amazing time-limited rewards. A big thanks to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. Now back to the Grimdark. The wind sighed over iron wreckage. It whistled through rusted pipes. Metal creaked against metal, the notes scraping up and down, a desultory song in the wastelands. The ruins were a hard yet shapeless black mass in the night. Hills of jagged shadow leaned over Vazia Reinhardt as her and her brother made their way towards the abandoned Maglev station. There was no moon. The only light came from the glow of the decaying outskirts of Carchera, one of the city's oldest satellite industrial sectors. Carchera's long decline had eroded its edges first, and the manufactories here had closed centuries ago. The land was slowly reclaiming the region. The long siege by the forest had sunk roots between the fallen rockcrete walls. Vazia thought that she could hear the waving of ferns and struggling shrubs, a green susurrus beneath the dying groans of metal. Bakken risked turning on his torch. Its beam caught the base of a rockcrete staircase, crumbling and stained 100 yards ahead. "We're almost there," he said. Vazia sucked her lower lip.
This might be a waste of time.
The enforcer stopped walking. "What? Did I hear you right?"
Just wanted to say it. You know it's true.
"Are you changing your mind?" Bakken asked. "This was your idea."
I know, and no, I'm not changing my mind.
But if they did turn away from the shell of Chiago Station, she could live with that decision. "I don't believe this," said Bakken.
I said I hadn't changed my mind.
"So, we're going?"
We're going.
She made herself walk on. Coming here had been her idea, as she was the one who had urged Bakken to help her prove the reality of the Volgos train. She was the one who had been fascinated by the story since childhood, as she was the one who had lived and breathed the legend all her adult life. The effort to track down its existence, her obsession, that kept her sane through the monotony of her days as third junior cataloger, Agri Subdirectory Secundus, in the city's Adeptus Administratum halls. The Volgos train, the myths that ran through Carchera were bundles of contradictions, and what was consistent was also vague. The train ran only on moonless nights, stopping only at disused stations, so no one had ever actually seen it. The train ran through dreams. It traveled in the shared tales of children and bored adults, searching for something about Carchera that was extraordinary. The worn city edges had hundreds of miles of abandoned tracks and dozens of abandoned stations. Of course, a phantom coursed through the metal graveyard. Where did it go? Where did it take its passengers? To Volgast? Where was that? No one knew. The name did not show up on any of the maps of Osarian. If there had been such a place on the planet, it was now gone. Bakken kept his torch on, aimed low, until they reached the stairs. Through unspoken agreement, him and Vazia kept their presence in the ruins hidden. They were breaking no edict by being here. It was intuition that prompted their actions, the sense that their quarry would not appear if they were visible. The steps rose above heaped debris, climbing into the dim light of the city. Vazia could see well enough to place her feet, but there was no longer any handrail, so she and Bakken kept to the center. Rockcrete crunched quietly beneath their feet. Fragments crumbled away and skittered down into the dark.
Does this feel steady to you?
Vazia asked. "No. Do you know another way up?"
No,
she admitted. Cracks covered the platform like old veins. The song of the wind had a deeper tone here, as if the elevated track was a massive tuning fork, its vibrations going on and on, a somnambulist hum in the night. There were no shelters. The station was a bare surface, a utilitarian construct that had lost all meaning. Vazia and Bakken advanced to the edge of the platform. They looked up and down the track, but Vazia saw only night. The track curved off into the darkness in both directions. It ran from nowhere to nowhere. The abyss concealed anything Vazia could imagine. Dreams or nightmares could emerge from this black. She half hoped nothing at all would come. Half hoped more than 30 years of wondering would not be satisfied with absence. An hour passed, then another. The wind sang. Tedium took the edge off anxiety. "When will it come?" Bakken's mournful tone told Vazia that his words were more an expression of despair than a question. She answered anyway.
No one knows. It might have come earlier. It might not come at all. It might not be real. Though it is. I know it is. Did you want to give up?
"No, we stay until dawn." His debts must have been worse than she thought. His need for the train sounded greater than hers. Even a few hours ago, she would not have thought that was possible.
Are things really that bad?
She asked. "Yes," Bakken said after a long silence.
You can't know that the train leads to wealth. Even if it turns out to be real, that's just a story.
The train itself is a story.
I'm sure it's more than that.
Then so is the treasure. It has to be.
Throne, well, what have you done?
Nothing new, just more of it. Too much. The debts are due now. My creditors are insistent. I think they're about to make an example out of me.
But you're an enforcer.
That's the point.
How would they dare?
That's what I thought. That was my mistake. They dare. Bakken said, tired and sounding disgusted with himself. They have political power that I don't. I need this, Vazia. I need this to be real. The wind picked up. It had been an east wind, blowing from their right. Now it came from the left, a strong blast and growing stronger, the air rushing ahead of something massive, as if the night were a tunnel. Then, darkness within darkness took on direction and form. It became a shape, rushing towards the station. Vazia and Bakken jerked back from the edge of the platform. The train was huge, bigger than should have been possible on the narrow maglev track. Blasts of steam erupted from the locomotive as it braked suddenly at the platform. Yet, except for the creaking and rattling of the cars as they leaned back and forth with the train's motion, it was almost completely silent. There was no headlamp. The train was a mass of iron night that crawled towards them like a predator. In the faint light, Vazia made out ornate metalwork on the locomotive. It bulged and twisted, shaped like the movement of the steam. She had never seen an engine like this. It seemed ancient, an entity emerged from a tomb of a forgotten age. Though there was no illumination from within the locomotive, a dull red shone inside all but the first of 9 passenger cars. The train came to a stop with the middle car in front of Vazia and Bakken. The doors hissed open directly before them, the rest remaining shut.
An invitation,
Vazia whispered. She stared at the train, heart hammering. The reality of the legend was too huge, too heavy. She had imagined many things over the years, some sinister, some hopeful, all of them pale, shrunken and vague before the thing itself. She could not move, she could barely think. Awe held her fast. Bakken cleared his throat. An invitation, he echoed with a hoarse croak. Then, we should accept, he said, his voice stronger. He stepped over the threshold into the passenger car.
Bakken,
Vazia said.
Wait.
He turned around, faced her, but stayed in the train. No.
The doors opened for us. For us. The train knew we were here. What if this is a trap?
Then I'm no worse off than I was before. Are you coming with me or not? She hesitated, low ticks and creaks coming from the train as it idled. It was waiting for her. She should go home. She had her proof. She didn't need to know more.
If I walk away, will I always wonder?
She thought. She boarded the train. There was never any real choice. The doors closed behind her, and with a lurch, the train started moving.
To Volgast, then,
said Vazia. To Volgast, said Bakken. The passenger car was a shell. There were no seats, no decor of any kind. There was only the black iron of the hull and dull, flickering lumen strips. Their red light did little more than create shadows. There were scratches on the walls, some of them deep, like clawed flesh. Vazia ran her fingers over them, tracing the way they ran into each other. She snatched her hand away before she felt a pattern. What's that smell? Bakken asked. Vazia wrinkled her nose. The tang in the air made her think of insects and age. The train picked up speed, the car rocking slightly from side to side. Vazia looked out the window. The track was curving away from Carchera, and the lights of the city were fading. They were traveling deeper into night, deeper into the void. The train hit a sharp bend, and the car jerked. Vazia almost fell, and Bakken reached suddenly for his shock maul. He was not in uniform, but he had slipped his weapon through his belt. He pulled it out now and looked towards the next car back.
What is it?
I thought I heard voices. They peered through the narrow windows of the connecting doors between the cars, but there was no one there. Bakken slid the doors open, moved into the other car, and prowled forwards, shock maul at the ready. Vazia followed, keeping a few steps back in case he started to swing. They were halfway down when the far doors opened. 2 women and a man entered. When they saw Bakken, they stopped dead and raised their hands. We aren't here to fight, one of the women said. There will be plenty for all of us, said the man.
We won't make trouble,
said the other woman. Vazia came up beside Bakken. She touched his shoulder and he lowered his maul.
Who are you?
She asked. Dara, said one of the women. She was older than her 2 companions, squat, clean-shaven, and she had the appearance of a manufactory serf, one who had worked the forges long enough to be tempered by them into a hardened alloy of flesh. This is Krent. The man looked like another refugee from the forges, one who hadn't been there as long. He had been badly burned recently. The left side of his face and his arm were shiny with scar tissue. And Nevi. The other woman, who looked about the same age as Krent, was more slightly built than her two friends and wore a soiled valet uniform. A servant from one of the noble families of Carchera, Vazia guessed, one who had been dismissed and was now scrambling to survive. Vazia introduced herself and Bakken, keeping to first names only. Like Dara, Bakken tensed for a moment, but worrying about being identified was a concern that belonged back on the platform. They had entered the world of a legend. Everything, Vazia thought, was different now, for better or for worse. "How many are you?" Bakken asked. "Just the three of us," said Krent. "We had a fourth, but she stayed behind." He paused when Nevi shuddered and shook her head sharply.
What is it?
Said Vazia.
She's dead.
"We aren't sure," said Dara.
She is?
Nevi insisted.
I know what I saw.
"It was dark. Too dark to tell," said Krent.
No, it wasn't. Not that dark. She tripped. Somehow she tripped and she fell under the train.
Vazia's mouth dried, and she thought, if I had stayed behind, would I have tripped too?
"So she tripped,"
said Dara.
"She should have been more careful. She should have come with us."
To Volgast?
Vazia said. "That's right," said Krent. "And its riches." Dara nodded.
You all believe that?
Vazia asked.
"We do,"
Dara said empathetically.
Yes,
Nevi said, sounding like someone who was rapidly losing her faith.
I have to.
"She's alone."
Dara explained to Vazia.
4 children, all ailing. Dead husband. She needs this.
And you?
Vazia asked.
"I'm tired of being hungry,"
Dara said, fury barely suppressed.
What about you?
Vazia said to Krent. "I just want my life to be something better than survival." His hope sounded worn out from years of pointless use.
"Isn't that why you're here?"
I just want to know the truth,
said Vazia, but she wondered if she should have used the past tense. "Have you seen anyone else aboard?" Bakken asked the others.
"The last 2 cars are full,"
said Krent.
"There must be 20 or 30 people. They came on in small groups like us. The train has been circling Carchera."
He glanced at the window and the blackness outside.
"This is the longest we've gone without a stop,"
he added.
"So, we're going to Volgast,"
said Bakken.
"We're all agreed, though that tells us nothing. Does anyone know what way we're heading?"
"No," said Dara.
"No one does. Too dark to see, and we can't open any of the windows. We volunteered to go forward to the locomotive, but maybe there's someone there who can tell us."
Vazia noticed Dara's pause. Maybe there was someone there. Maybe there was no one. There was a doubt that Dara feared to express, even to herself.
"Good,"
Bakken said.
"Let's go."
He turned and led the way towards the front of the train. The others fell in behind, deferring to his leadership without question. If he wanted the responsibility, he was welcome to it. The light in the car forward of the one that Vazia and Bakken had entered in was even dimmer. There was only one lumen strip functioning, and it kept flickering off altogether. Vazia peered through the doors at the same time as Bakken, and she jerked back. "What?" Bakken asked.
Didn't you see? There was someone there.
He looked again.
"No one there now. What did you see?"
At the far end. Someone in robes, I think. Their skin was so pale.
"Are you sure?"
Yes.
"So they came on board before you,"
said Krent.
"At one of the earlier stops."
Are any of the others robed?
Vazia asked him, skeptical.
"No,"
he admitted, looking uneasy too.
"Whoever it was, they're gone now,"
Bakken said.
"We're not accomplishing anything by staying here."
I don't think we should go on,
Nevi said.
"And what would you do instead?"
Dara asked her.
I just want to leave.
Dara snorted. She pointed to the door and the rushing darkness beyond.
"Go right ahead. Let me know how that goes."
"The rest of you do what you want," Bakken said. "I'm going on." He shoved the doors aside and entered the next car. Vazia followed close behind. She had committed herself to seeing the truth through to the end when she came on board. There would be no hiding from it, so it was better to be active and seek it out. That was what she told herself. It was a way of keeping the paralysis of growing fear at bay. They walked down the length of the car, the insectile sourness of the air growing stronger. The lumen strip's stuttering rhythm of light and darkness made it hard to walk. Vazia's balance was precarious. When night bloomed before her eyes, it tried to make her pitch forward into it. Halfway to the next doors, she looked back and caught a glimpse of Nevi bringing up the rear. She felt a wave of sympathy. She wanted to tell the other woman that she understood, that she wished all of them were off the train. There were a lot more scratches on the walls here. The marks were converging towards the front of the train. Vazia could see the patterns now. They looked like how the air smelled. Bakken reached the end of the car and stopped. He was still looking into the next carriage, the last before the locomotive, and he had done nothing to reach for the door handles when Vazia caught up to him. "You were right," he said softly. He stepped aside so she could see more easily. Her breath caught. There was no light at all inside the next car, but the flickering lumen strips in theirs cast a penumbral illumination a few yards ahead. The carriage was full of people. They were standing in rows, motionless, silent, all of them robed, their skulls hairless, their flesh maggot white. They were all facing forward towards the locomotive. Vazia's flesh crawled. She was staring at statues. She was staring at corpses. She was staring at neither, and worse. She backed away with Bakken. "What did you see?" Dara asked, much too loud. "Shh," Vazia hissed. Dara pushed past to have a look herself. Then she, too, moved away from the door, her eyes wide, her steps careful and quiet. They all retreated 2 cars back. What do you think they are?" Krent asked.
"I don't want to know,"
said Nevi.
I think she's right.
Vazia said. Her curiosity was more than sated. She cursed it for having ever existed. "Agreed," Bakken said. He was sweating, and his anxiety did nothing for Vazia's state of mind. "All right then, we don't want to have anything to do with them, whatever they are. I'm not staying put and waiting for them to take notice."
"What choice do we have?"
Dara asked.
I think we should head back and join all the others you were with.
Said Vazia.
Strength in numbers.
Bakken tapped his shock maul. "Did anyone else bring a weapon?"
"No, not that I saw," said Dara. "And we don't know if those robed corpses are armed. I'm going to assume they are."
They might not be dangerous,
Nevi said, pleading for someone to agree with her and soothe her fears, but no one did. Bakken moved to the right-hand window. He gave it an experimental wrap. Armor glass, he muttered.
What are you thinking?
Vazia asked, unwilling to believe he was going to try something this mad. "I'm leaving this train."
How?
"Not through that window at any rate. We can't smash that." Bakken went to the exit in the middle of the car, Dara following at his heels.
You can't get out at all,
Vazia said. "We won't if we don't try." Her brother had the fixed look in his eyes that came when he was set on a goal, no matter how ill-advised, and would not listen to reason. He examined the doors. There were handles for opening them manually if they failed to function during a stop. He grabbed the right-hand one and nodded to Dara, who took the other. They pulled, leaning hard to pit all of their strength against the doors.
This is madness,
Vazia said. They didn't listen. Nevi and Krent drew closer to them, as if effort were the same as a plan. Vazia didn't think the doors would open, but then, as Bakken and Dara strained, they parted a fraction of an inch. Wind came in the car with a high-pitched scream. "Pull!" Bakken urged. Bit by bit, the doors opened. Nevi and Krent backed away as the wind roared in with greater strength. Vazia held herself against the hull on the opposite side. The wind buffeted her. It tried to scoop her up in its grip. She pictured herself hurled out into the night, and she stood fast. Bakken and Dara straightened. The doors were open all the way. A gale battered the interior of the car. Bakken kept a firm grip on the handle and leaned his head past the threshold, looking down.
You can't jump,
Vazia called.
We're at least 50 feet up.
And if the tracks were passing over a gorge? If there's water, I'll take my chances. He kept staring down. He made no move to leap.
And?
Vazia asked.
Is there water? Can you even tell?
Bakken and Dara exchanged a look. No, Bakken grimaced. I can't see anything at all. They pushed the doors closed again, shutting out the gale. Vazia let her body relax enough to breathe. Bakken wasn't going to jump, and she wasn't going to be swept out of the carriage by the wind.
What are we going to do?
Nevi pleaded.
There's nothing we can do,
Vazia said.
We're here till the end of the line.
There was no question that the only stop would be the last one. The city was far behind, and with it, she knew in her heart the hope of any stations. Bakken punched the door in frustration.
Is she right?
Nevi asked him, and he nodded.
We should go to the rear,
Said Vazia.
join the others.
Strength in numbers is all we have.
Krent added. Better than nothing, Bakken said, and started down the car, leading the way as if this had been his idea. When they reached the crowd in the rear carriage, they were greeted by expressions that went from hopeful and back to frightened in moments. Nevi described the robed figures, and fear spread through the carriage like a heavy mist. No one suggested that all would be well, that the treasure of Volgast was what waited at the Terminus. No one believed that story any longer, least of all Bakken. When we stop, he said, when the doors open, we leave as a group, in force. There are enough of us that'll be hard to control. Don't be docile.
What if we're met by weapons?
Someone asked. We'll deal with that when and if it happens. He sounded confident, Vazia thought. Her brother had always been good at projecting assurance and the impression of forward momentum. She saw the illusion clearly enough. His strategy wasn't the best option available to them. It was the only one. She could have easily suggested the same course of action.
The treasure might still be real,
said Krent. Bakken nodded. Even Nevi did. We all have to know, Vazia thought. All of us. Hours later, with dawn still distant, the train slowed down, then came to a stop. The doors rattled open. Cold air blew into the car. There was a collective hesitation. Vazia started moving first. She wanted to get off the train. By starting forwards, she jerked Bakken into action, and he hurried to step out onto the platform just ahead of her. The others followed quickly. Outside the train, irregularly staggered torches burned on iron columns, illuminating the surroundings with a wavering, shifting glow. Shadows jerked back and forth over a confusion of metal constructs. The platform was in what had once been a large maglev station. A dozen other disused tracks converged here, feeding into the ruins of a conglomeration of manufactories. A fragment of rockcrete wall stood next to one of the torches, and on it was a sign that read Bogardas Complex.
Not Volgast,
Vazia said, looking at the sign. The name faded away into the fog of myth. The Bogardas Complex was a name with a different resonance, one of loss, of the long crumbling of a civilization. It had been centuries since the manufactories here had shut down. The Bogardas Complex lived on only in Karchera's fading sense of history. It was a thing that had been and was no longer, and its memory was flakes of rust. At the other end of the train, the robed beings had also disembarked. Still, they did not face back.
They're ignoring us,
said Bakken.
Oh, good,
said Krent.
Well, then we can leave.
And go where?
Vazia asked. They were hundreds of miles from Karchera.
Are you planning to walk back on the track? Can you see in the dark?
They're leaving,
Nevi said. The figures were retreating, heading deeper into the ruins, following the line of torches.
We should follow,
said Bakken.
Are you mad?
Nevi exclaimed.
They haven't attacked us. We haven't been captured. There may be something worth finding here after all.
Then we have to see,
said Dara.
Do we?
Nevi asked.
Could you go back knowing you hadn't tried everything for your children?
No,
said Nevi.
And if we can't go back?
Vazia asked, but she started walking with Bakken anyway. There was nothing else to do. Everyone else followed. Vazia even heard some hopeful whispers. People trying to convince themselves that Bakken was right. They tried to cling to the dream that had brought them to this spot. She tried to feel resigned instead. She was going to find out the truth of the myth, whether she wanted to or not. Beyond the platform, the rubble of the station and the manufactories had been rebuilt and repurposed. The passengers of the Volgast train descended a slope of battered iron and rockcrete, and it led into a vast tunnel. Chimneys and shattered facades leaned against one another to create an angular roof. Torn, twisted metal reached out of the walls like arms. The torches carried on ahead, and the floor kept sloping deeper into the gloom. From somewhere deep in the structure came the sound of low chanting.
Do you hear that?
Vazia asked Bakken.
Yeah, I can't make out what they're saying.
It doesn't sound like any prayer to the Emperor that I know.
And? Does that change our options? She glanced at the shockmaul in Bakken's hand and wished for a weapon. The floor leveled off. Vazia saw now that some of the fissures in the walls of wreckage looked like passages. She guessed this tunnel was a major artery cutting through a web inside the wreckage. She didn't like where her imagination went because there was still nothing she could do about it. The chanting grew louder, and at last, the train passengers crossed a huge angular threshold. They entered a circular chamber at least 100 feet across. The ceiling must have been 50 feet up. It was shrouded in darkness, barely touched by the torchlight. Sharp angles glinted, and the shadows of a weave of iron made Vasya think again of a web. This was its heart. The center of the roof was utterly dark. There was nothing there to pick up the light of the torches. Is that a shaft? There were hundreds of robed people here, all chanting, all looking upward. They all had the same decayed pallor, but the shapes of some of the skulls disturbed Vasya. She was too far away to see them clearly in the dimness, but there was something inhuman about their silhouettes. As the passengers arrived, the chanting ceased. Still looking up, the worshippers nearest the entrance drew apart, creating a path that led to the center of the chamber.
No,
Vasya said. Exactly, Bakken agreed. They turned around. Even though Vasya knew the gesture was an empty one, there was nowhere to go. She knew she was going to die. The rest of their company turned too, but there, back up the sloping path, were many more of the robed beings. They began walking slowly towards the passengers. There was movement next to the walls, the swift and angular movement of things coming down through the shadows. Things that snarled, things whose claws clicked and scratched against the rockcrete and iron. And from above, from inside the ceiling shaft, came a hissing, echoing roar. Bakken raised his shock maul and looked up, ready to fight, until the thing dropped to the floor with a rockcrete shattering impact, and he dropped the maul, his body going slack with terror. The worshippers chanted again, and the passengers screamed. The creature, both reptilian and insectoid, towered over them on its massive hind legs. 2 of its 4 legs were bony scythes. The other 2 resembled arms. And at first, Vasya thought that was the most horrible thing. The way the utterly inhuman mimicked the human and made it monstrous, with one limb seeming to become a hand wielding a serrated blade and the other holding a whip of flexible cartilage. The limbs were not the worst thing, though. She saw the worst thing when she stared, mesmerized by monstrous awe, at the elongated horned skull emerging from a shell of chitinous armor. The worst thing was the expression, forged by the narrow eyes and the jaws that gaped wide enough to swallow a man. The horror looked down at Vasya. Its gaze was mindless predation, but it was also all-knowing. Something as old as night looked out at her through those eyes. It knew her as she knew an insect. Her old faith disintegrated before the truth behind myths. Bakken's scream was short and sharp as a scythe pierced his chest and lifted him to the jaws. There were many other screams as the being waded into the passengers and began to feed. Vasya did not scream. She fell on her knees, her vision filled by the sight of the divine in all its monstrosity. She was still on her knees when one of the clawed beings, an emissary of the god, seized her. Much later, when she found herself disembarking the train in Karchera once more, she rejoiced in her new faith and in the knowledge that her own being had been altered and that she was part of the true divine. Made new, made a prophet, she walked into the city, ready to tell a story of mythical trains and wealth to whoever would listen. There was a legend to spread. There were curious minds to lure. There was a world to harvest.